Bill McKibben, the one, the only. Hi, Bill. You with us?
Indeed, I am. It's good to see you, friend.
You too. I feel like you're in space. I feel like you're up there with the Mars rover, and you're about to tell us that, in fact, we should stay on Earth.
I'm in Vermont, which is halfway there anyway. So
okay. Bill, I thought that Ken was going to do a little bio of you, but in lieu of that, okay, let's just, so for those of you who don't know Bill and his writings in organizations and public letters and his arrest record, I wonder if you would just begin by telling us what put you on your path. What got you started? This is a panel on intergenerational activism. What put you on that path?
Well, I got going when I was quite young, as it turns out. When I was 27 and a young cub reporter at the New Yorker, I wrote what turned into my first book, a book called The End of Nature. It was also the first book about climate change, at least for a non-scientific audience. And in those days, we called it the greenhouse effect. And that really did set the rest of my life in motion, because in the course of writing it, I figured out that not only was it the most interesting story in the world, but that I also cared deeply about the outcome. I didn't want the world to overheat and blow away. So I've spent the next 3+ decades writing and writing and writing, but also organizing and organizing. We built 350.org, the first global grassroots climate change movement. We've organized 20,000 demonstrations in every country on earth except North Korea. And now ThirdAct, which organizes people like me over the age of 60 to work to protect both our climate and our political climate, our democracy. We're a year old now, and it's going great guns. It's been a remarkable year, in fact, and it's vindicated my sense that a lot of our instincts about older people and their politics were just wrong.
Can everybody hear Bill well? Is there a volume? Yeah, everyone can hear things okay? Okay, great. I want to read a quote from a talk of yours that I recently watched. I'm quoting Bill McKibben here. It is wonderful that young people are taking the lead in the climate fight, but it is not okay that we have assigned saving the planet to 17-year-olds as if it was some kind of homework problem set. They cannot do it themselves. They need the rest of us backing them up. And in particular, they need those of us in the baby boomer and silent generations above the age of 60. And you go on to say why that is. Why is that?
Well, let me say, first of all, that I've done most of my organizing over the years with young people, and they've done incredible work. When we started 350.org, it was myself in my 40s and 7 college students. We set up this vast fossil fuel divestment campaign that's become the biggest corporate campaign of its kind in history. We're at about $40 trillion now in institutions and institutions and pension funds and things that have divested from coal and oil and gas. Princeton was the most recent a couple of weeks ago. The kids who did that work on campus when they left college went on to form what's called the Sunrise Movement that brought us the Green New Deal, and hence our first real climate bill that finally passed Congress this summer. And meanwhile, there are all those other even younger kids exemplified by Greta Thunberg doing this work. Greta is remarkable. She's one of my favorite people on the planet to work with. I adore her. She would be the first to say there are 10,000 Greta Thunbergs and they have 10 million followers. That's how many kids were out on climate strike in September 2019 before the pandemic hit. So good on them. They are doing what they should be doing. I got tired of hearing too many people say this is up to the next generation, because for all their intelligence and energy and idealism, they lack the structural power to make change on the scale we need at the pace we need, both to protect our climate and to protect other crucial things like our democracy. Older people, there are 70 million of us over the age of 60 in this country. Not only is that a large number, it's even larger than it first seems, because We punch way above our weight politically. We all vote. There is no known way to prevent old people from voting. And so Washington pays huge attention to us. Not only that, fair or not, we ended up with most of the country's financial assets. 70% of the assets belong to people in the baby boomer or silent generation, compared with about 5% for millennials. That means if you want Wall Street to pay attention to you, you need people with hairlines like mine. Now, people had not for a long time tried doing this kind of organizing, maybe not since Maggie Kuhn and the Gray Panthers back in the 1970s. And the reason was that political scientists kept saying, well, people become more conservative as they age. We can't let that be true in this case, too much is at stake. And I don't think we need to, because I think that the current crop of older people is very different from some of their predecessors. If you're in your 60s or 70s or 80s now, your first act on this planet was during that period of really remarkable social, cultural, political transformation of the 60s, the 70s, when we started taking women seriously in public life, when the apex of the civil rights movement, the first Earth Day, and the birth of modern environmentalism. If you have any doubts, look at the things that the right-wing Supreme Court took on this summer. Voting Rights Act of 1965, Gun Control Act of 1968, Clean Air Act of 1971, Roe v. Wade of 1973. If we want to protect the world that we knew, the physical world, the political world, then we have a lot of work to do, and we have the skills, the resources, the time in order to do it. And many of us now have kids and grandkids who turn this abstract concept of legacy into something very concrete. Your legacy is the world you leave behind for the people you love the most.
I wonder if we could get really specific for a minute, thinking about intergenerational activism, and maybe just think back to the dozens of meetings, the hundreds of meetings you've been in with people of all ages, teenagers to, people your age and above. What's the secret to, I don't know if it's a secret, but how does that work? What are you thinking as you're in these meetings with people of such a wide age span, such a swath of ages?
One of the things that's beautiful is the interest that everybody has in the other. There's been a lot of this kind of okay boomer stuff with young people who are rightly, I think, worried that they're being handed an empty bag as we exit the scene. But when you start working together at all, what you find is an extraordinary sense of relief among young people that their elders are backing them up, are determined to help them get done what they need doing. Obviously, they're the ones who are going to have to live their lives out on a crumbling planet and in a crumbling democracy if we let those trends continue. But they understand too that they need our help. I'll tell you the place really where it first began to dawn on me that maybe we could do something like this. It was about a decade ago. And I was helping organize the first big protests against the Keystone Pipeline, which turned into the first big defeat for big oil. We'd called people to Washington to come do civil disobedience outside the White House. I wrote the letter, which is a hard letter to write, asking people to get arrested. And in this case, I said, I did not think for once young people should have to be the cannon fodder here. If you're 19, an arrest record may not be the best thing for your resume. One of the few unmixed blessings of growing older is, past a certain point, what the hell are they going to do to you? So it was with real pleasure that we watched, people pour into Washington. This turned into the biggest civil disobedience action about anything in this country in a very long time. More than 1,200 people went to jail. We didn't ask them as they were getting arrested, how old are you? Because that would have been rude. But cleverly, I think, we did say, who was president when you were born? And the two biggest cohorts were from the FDR and the Truman administrations. On the last day of these protests, there was a guy arrested with a sign around his neck that said, World War II vet, handle with care. He was old enough that he'd been born in the Warren Harding administration, which was truthfully long enough ago, I'd forgotten there really was a Warren Harding administration. It was great for the kids who were on hand to see their elders acting the way we need elders acting in a working civilization. It kind of was I'll tell you one of the other things that got me thinking along these lines was seeing over and over again on Winnebagos and things, the single worst bumper sticker I ever remember seeing. Maybe you've seen it. It says, I'm spending my kid's inheritance. Ha ha ha. Literally, that's what we've been doing. But now lots and lots of people are stopping and thinking differently. I just came back from a big demonstration in Brooklyn. We're getting ready to do this nationwide day of action against the four big American banks, Chase City, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, that are the four biggest funders of the fossil fuel industry. And we were sort of warming up for it with this protest in Brooklyn. There were lots and lots of high school kids as we were marching between these bank branches. And of course, being somewhat sprier, they were at the front of the march. But at the back, there was a big group of us third actors with a big sign that said, fossils against fossil fuels. So we're doing our best to do it in the right spirit and to make as much trouble as we can.
Well, that's one thing I love about your work, Bill. Is it's never ho-hum. It's always, all your organizations have great names and actions, and there's so much imagination and a kind of a slyness to it too. And I think that's part of it, the spirit in which the activism happens. How many people in this room have been arrested for political? Okay, okay. Besides maybe a drunk driving or so I do think that's a really interesting thought about civil disobedience, about going in and taking those risks, and what chapters of your lives you take more risks. Maybe in the first trimester of life, although earlier in the day people were talking about not like 1 act, 2 act, 3 act, but a longer term, many acts. And I know your organization is called ThirdAct, but maybe in those years you're taking more physical risk in Act 1. But now it's putting yourself on the line again, sort of using this time of life, and where people are looking for meaning and people are looking for something that feeds the soul in some way, is kind of digging in and getting a little more daring again.
I'll quickly add that getting arrested isn't the sine qua non of this work. It's one tool in the activist toolkit.
Yes.
But like any tool, it gets dull if you use it too much. Most of the work is far more mundane and beautiful. One of the projects we did this year at ThirdAct was have people write postcards to high school seniors. We called it Senior to Senior, telling them about what voting had meant in their life and encouraging them to register, because only about 10% of high school students register for their first election. And it was incredibly moving to see the things that people were writing, and incredibly moving to see how determined they were to do it. I was visiting one retirement community where there was a woman well into her 90s who couldn't really get out of bed anymore, but she could still write postcards, and she was writing them by the 100, saying, I may be closer to the exit than I am to the entrance, but it doesn't mean that I cannot be making a real difference for the world that I care as deeply about as I ever did. That said, if there are people who, and I hear this regularly now from people who tell me that getting arrested is on your bucket list, if it is, I can help out too.
How many people here are involved with organizations or projects where you're in intergenerational meetings, activations, projects? Bill, you can't see the audience, can you? There's a lot of people. what's the key to it? Someone just speak from the heart for a second. Let's add your voices in, and I think a mic can find you. Does anyone want to add something that you find the key to this intergenerational activism, things that are working or things that are just not working? Be brave.
Curiosity about each other's perspective. They both come at it from different perspectives, the two generations, and that fuels each other to work even harder. So that's what we see.
Who else? There's someone over there.
Hi, my name is Emily Clay, and I work for Circle, an intergenerational career platform. And what I've found is that people realize, oh, we're more similar. You know, I mean, we all have issues and, you know, challenges, obstacles in life. And people were surprised by that.
I think there's
Hi. So yeah, I'm part of the Sunrise movement as well. And one of the best things is that the older generations teaches us how to do like peaceful protesting. The strategies are awesome.
What are some of those strategies?
Well, mostly they are, well, I'm in the art part, like there's branches. So they create amazing like posters and art for going to the protest. And a lot of it is irony. A lot of it.
Irony.
I would add, sort of building off of her comment about curiosity, to the extent that both generations are deepening their understanding of these complex issues, and to the extent that there are opportunities to do that alongside each other, it puts both generations on the same side of the table instead of talking to one another as if one person has more knowledge than the other about how do we tackle these huge thorny issues.
What are you thinking, Bill, as you're hearing all this?
I'm thinking that these echo all the things that we've found. It's particularly true, I think, working with pretty young people, high school and college age kids, and people my age and older, because truthfully, the relationship between grandparents and grandkids is often a lot less fraught than the one between parents and kids. Everybody cuts the other more slack, you know, which is a good thing when you're trying to get work done. And I'll just say the best part of it is how much fun it is, and soon you start forgetting, you know, the age of. I seem to spend a week every autumn writing college recommendations for people I think of as just close colleagues in these fights. It's just they turn out to be 17 and now it's time for them to go to college, you know. So a lot of that drops away and it's really fun.
Do you want to tell people what ThirdAct is, what the premise of your latest organization, what your the premise of your t-shirt?
So ThirdAct is exactly a year old now. We celebrated our first birthday this week. And we organize people over the age of 60 for action on democracy and on climate. We picked those two issues because they seemed the most crucial, because they cover a lot of ground, and because they're things that, in a certain sense, we took for granted our whole lives and shouldn't have. We knew about the environment, and people worked to, you know, pass anti-pollution laws and things. But even at the height of the first Earth Day, it wouldn't have occurred to us that we were going to melt the North Pole and the South Pole. You know, those of us of a certain age lived through Watergate, so we took threats to democracy seriously. But, you know, in Watergate, the system kind of worked. It would not have occurred to us that we would reach a point where thousands of Americans would storm the nation's capital, killing police officers in an effort to stop voting. So we really find lots of people who understand that we are on the edge of being the first generation that leaves the world a worse place than we found it. We do not want that, and we know we can do a lot about it. And part of the great pleasure has been the number of remarkable people who are still out there, still hard at work, who've been doing it since they were young. You know, much of the leadership for our big day of action, for instance, on climate and the banks, which will be on March 21st, 32123. Much of the leadership's coming from a guy named Sam Brown, who in 1968, as a college student, organized the Vietnam Moratorium Days, the biggest single anti-war demonstrations of the 1960s. The chair of our board is a woman named Heather Booth, who went south in 1963 to register voters in Freedom Summer, and then was involved in the early pro-choice movement. You can see her work documented in the new HBO film, The James Project, and has kept at it her whole life, but now is just crackerjack at organizing people our age. So there are incredible resources coming forward. My lead advisor on this project and my closest colleague is a woman from your part of the world out there in Oakland named Akaya Winwood, who has done her whole life been doing leadership training for progressive organizations. And really the kind of depth and breadth of experience that she's able to draw on and find people all over the place just never ceases to amaze us. I mean, I guess it shouldn't. There stands to reason that there's lots and lots of people in this generation with lots of experience, but too much of it has been let go to waste. The other thing I'll add is that it's very fun to try and reincarnate a little bit of the spirit of that earlier era too. You know, when kids are going on and on to me about okay, boomer and whatever, I'm always, as I say, I always just smile. But if I feel a little tetchy about it, sometimes I'll say, okay, but you have to admit, our generation did produce the greatest music that there ever was. And so it is really fun that, you know, people like Carole King and Patti Smith and Neil Young and Bette Midler and things have involved themselves in ThirdAct, because it helps bring some of that remarkable cultural legacy too to bear on this.
I love it. Well, let's bring people's questions in now as we come into the home stretch here. Who? Yes.
I have a microphone, so hopefully it works. Bill, I know you were just at the Climate Change Summit a couple of weeks ago, and I'm just curious, how many young people were there?
There were fewer than one would have hoped, because it was Egypt made it extremely hard for people to get visas and things. This was the first time we'd had one of these big climate conferences, and in essence was a police state. And there was a good, solid representation of young people, especially from Africa, and they were among the strongest voices calling for action on loss and damage, i.e. compensation for the price that's already been paid by the developing world for the climate crisis. It was good to see them there, and good to be making many of these links across generations there too.
Who else would like to ask Bill? Could you hear that? How many older adults were there in Egypt?
Well, there were lots of them. Lots of older heads of state and petroleum ministers, and lots of fossil fuel lobbyists, and so on and so forth. But also a lot of wonderful activists from around the world who have been at this a long time. And you know, sometimes those conferences sort of serve, if nothing else, as a way for people to get together and organize for what we're going to do in the year ahead. I remember once one of my old friends, Elizabeth May, the head of the Green Party in Canada, coming up to me at one of these conferences and giving me a big hug and saying, "Oh, this is so much fun. It's just like a family reunion aboard the Titanic." And there is a little bit of that energy there, I must say.
Ooh, yes.
Thank you. I'm wondering a little bit about the intergenerational dynamics within an activist movement. And specifically, is it mostly that older adults' presence and even power and contribution is tolerated by younger people as long as the younger people are in the lead, and whether young people will join a cause led by older adults?
Some of each. We try hard to make sure that we keep young people in the lead as much as possible, although fully aware that there are things we're good at. This Banks campaign is a really good example. When we go out on March 21st, there'll be lots of young people, but on the other hand, it's a weekday. And because banks are open then, and that's a day when there's more likely to be more people my age who are able to be part of it, which is good because that's mostly whose money is in those vaults. So this is a good reminder that we have different particular superpowers that we bring to this work. Older people, as I say, vote in huge numbers, and they have financial assets and the ability to leverage them in order to make change. So those are the things we're really aiming for. Young people have a whole different set of superpowers, including, above all in this case, the kind of overwhelming moral authority. I'm going to be dead before the very worst of climate change hits. But if you're in high school right now, it doesn't matter what career you think you're training for. If we don't get this under control, by the time you're in the prime of your life, your job is going to be emergency response, because that's going to be everybody's job. So they really do have the overwhelming moral authority here. But we all have a huge role to play because we all can look ahead and see that the people we care about are in harm's way.
Bill, can you mention maybe 3 young activists around the world that you're watching now, or that you're in collaboration with, people that aren't on the radar yet, that aren't Greta and known, or the head of Sunrise, but just for people to kind of open their eyes to some people that are moving you?
There are 10 million of them. There's so many, but I had a wonderful back and forth dialogue this week with a wonderful woman named Gia Bastida of South American and indigenous background. Xie is her first name. She's fantastic. I did a program the other day with a woman named Louisa Neubauer from Germany, who's as powerful and prominent an environmentalist as Germany has, though she's quite young, and as poised and good on TV and good in political debate as anyone I've ever seen. And then when I was in Cairo, it was a tremendous pleasure to see, among many other young activists, a woman named Vanessa Nakate, who's sort of I guess you'd say, the Greta of Africa, or vice versa. Maybe Greta is the Vanessa Nakate of Sweden or whatever, but she's a fantastic organizer, and in a place that's really, really hard because you see every day the brunt of this great trauma. And to be able to keep your wits about you, to manage your anger and your bitterness, to reach out and make connections with the rest of the world, to do organizing on the scale that she does, well, it's a remarkable feat.
We're about to close, and I'll just add that there's a quote of Terry Tempest Williams, really wonderful writer about the environment, about the world, and she has a saying, "Collaboration is the only way forward." And I think you embody that, and the people in this room, I have that feeling as well. So on that note, it's March 16th.
March 21st, 32123. And I'll just add that Terry Tempest Williams has been a stalwart help at ThirdAct right from the start. So there's lots and lots of good energy coming in now. And please join us. You'll enjoy it.
I want to thank the Longevity Century Summit for including Bill McKibben today. Really wonderful. Thank you all for having us. Thank you.
And thank you, friend.